Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now let's go to Chad. There's been a violent crackdown by the authorities there as protesters took to the streets in the capital, Ndjamena. The demonstrators have been calling for the dissolution of the new ruling military council that took power following the sudden death of President Idriss Deby last week. The protesters want a return to civilian rule. France has condemned the violence, warning that its support for the generals is conditional on national dialogue and a fully democratic process. France, of course, being the former colonial power in Chad. Well, let's go to the Chadian capital, Ndjamena, now and speak to Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic. Good to see you, Karl. First of all, update us on this crackdown. There have been several more deaths. When we spoke yesterday, there were 2 deaths. Now we understand there are at least 9. What's the latest?
Well, the numbers keep changing, Charles. Now the death toll is up to at least 11. With dozens more still injured in the hospitals, and those numbers could climb. And to put things in perspective, Charles, virtually all of those who died, were killed, most of them were between the ages of 19 and 25 years of age, very young people. And I think that's also part of the problem, Charles. The majority of the population in Chad, of 16 million people, the majority is under the age of 30. So you have a situation where people have only known one leader, and that's Idriss Deby Itno. And quite frankly, people are saying 31 years is enough. So that's part of what's driving this right now. But what we saw from state TV, for example, we saw a flurry of diplomatic activity. We saw Chadian officials ranging from the president, vice president, the prime minister, and even in France as well, meeting with regional leaders such as South Sudan, meeting with leading members of the parliament, and even meeting with leaders of the opposition parties. This is really, in many ways, more show than anything else, because unless there's an agreement on what sort of timetable we're looking at, a timetable that's well short of 18 months because they're demanding an intermilitary transition. The biggest change, of course, Charles, that you referred to, is the about face of the French government, Emmanuel Macron, who last Friday, following the funeral ceremony, said that France stood unconditionally, unequivocally with the military council, will let nothing stand in its way of jeopardizing Chad's integrity. However, that changed swiftly when we saw the death toll rising, but also that reverberated to Paris, where you had thousands of Chadian diaspora who live in Paris and other surrounding cities in Paris, descending on Paris, voicing their support, calling Chad effectively a vassal state to end its colonial policy. So right now, we're really kind of at a delicate balance right now, because keep in mind, Charles, Chad is really convulsed with multiple crises. Besides this element of an uprising, you also have the insurgency, the rebels, who they were the ones who were based in Libya and killed Idriss Deby Itno, who would have now presumably fled to Niger. They're asking for cooperation with Niger. And then you also have problems with Islamic jihadists and al-Qaeda Maghreb types. That's why that incident that we were speaking about yesterday, where 12 Chadian soldiers were killed in the Chad Basin by Boko Haram. And the problem is Chad has been the linchpin of this strategy against both Islamic jihadists and also Boko Haram for several years. And that's what France has counted on. So the real moral dilemma is this. Do you make the importance of security in Chad and the region, does that override democratic values or not? And that's why you had Emmanuel Macron meeting with the DRC president, Felix Tshisekedi, issuing this combination of violence, because for the first time, Emmanuel Macron is saying there needs to be a transition to a civilian government that's also inclusive. So really it's a day-to-day thing, because, again, no one knows just what sort of timetable we're looking at. And ultimately, they want to see a new leader. They don't want an extension of what they're calling a monarchy or a family dynasty. They're saying 31 years is enough.
And Karl, what about today? Have people returned to the streets, or are things quiet after yesterday's storm?
Well, that's what's interesting, Charles. It's an uneasy truce, an uneasy calm. It's very subdued on the states, but there's a lot beneath the surface. The people are still processing the fact that 9 people have been killed, 9 very young people, the youth of Chad. And at the same time, you have dozens more injured. So while they were vowing to return to the streets today, we've not seen those protests today. However, they have vowed to return to the states, to the streets, which we could see in the coming days, as early as tomorrow, because they're saying they'll demonstrate, even though those protests are actually illegal, that they'll continue their protests until the military council is ended. But that could take some time to play out. So it's, in that respect, it's very, very volatile. And at the same time, they're more kind of, angered at the prospect of another family member, extending his rule over the country. So that's what's playing out right now. It's a very uneasy calm. And then keep in mind, Ramadan is coming to a close right now. And this is not a joyful Ramadan for any of the Muslims here in Chad, with Eid as well around the corner. There's nothing to celebrate.
And Karl, you talked about another family member taking over. That member, of course, General Mohammed Idriss Deby. He's been appealing for calm. He did so in his first nationwide address on Tuesday night. Did he look like a leader in control to you?
Well, he's 37 years old, Charles, which, it depends on the experience, how he prepared for it. I mean, some people are saying that by just naming him as the head of the military council, he's perhaps even being groomed to be the next leader. But, this is not a learning curve process. You need someone who's experienced both militarily and politically. And also, to be truthful, Charles, the Constitution of Chad has been changed a number of times, lowering the age requirements of what it takes to run for president of Chad. At one point, it was 40 years of age. At another point, it was 45 years of age. In both counts, Charles, Mohammed Deby is easily below the constitutional law to even run for office or to run the country. So people are also not amused by that.
Yes, quite. And I also understand that opposition parties and civil society leaders consider the speech he gave on Tuesday night a disappointment, because he spoke pretty generally, appealing for calm and national unity, but didn't say a word about the violent suppression of the protests, nor did he say anything about the offer by the rebels of dialogue.
That's right. This is why it's an uneasy truce right now. I mean, to give you an example of just how things are in disarray, when Idriss Deby Itno was the president of Chad, he basically controlled all levers of power. He controlled the military, the government, even the assembly, and also the party. He was the leader of the MPS party, which won the election. Right now, there is no leader of that party. So right now, that party is effectively rudderless as well. That's part of the problem, if you will, in other words, there's a big difference, Charles, between consolidating power, which is maybe what the military council is doing, consolidating power, and also forging national unity. Those are two different paths to stability right now, because one leads to potentially more violence, if not more violence, a path of deadly consequences.
And I mean, just briefly, Karl, what about what General Deby said about a return to civilian rule in 18 months? I mean, how has that been generally received beyond the opposition parties, just ordinary people in Chad?
Well, as you suggested, Charles, he was very vague, if not ambiguous about it. He said that they would return to civilian rule when the time is right. That's kind of an open-ended statement, an open-ended question, so no one really knows. And it's for a population that's never known any other leader but Idriss Deby Itno. And now they've got the son saying, no, we'll return to civilian rule when the time is right. What exactly does that mean? And more importantly, they don't want a planned succession that would then place the son, Mohammed Deby Itno, in power again as the leader, especially when he is not even old enough to run according to the Constitution. So it's very subdued and very uneasy right now, but people do want stability. No one's even talking about prosperity right now. They're talking about stability and peace from all the different conflicts that are engulfing and converging on this country.
And Karl, what about the apparent change in position of the French President Emmanuel Macron? Only last week he was in Chad for the funeral and was praising the authorities. He's now striking a very different tone, talking about further support being conditional on dialogue.
I'm sorry, Charles, you're referring to the French President Emmanuel Macron?
referring to Emmanuel Macron. I'm saying that,
Is that right,
he was there last week and now
Yes,
he's
yes.
striking
Yeah,
a different
yeah,
tone.
Well, it's an about-face, Charles, and it's almost embarrassing but today you had him meeting bilaterally with the DRC President Felix Tshisekedi, and together they drafted a statement condemning it because he didn't anticipate, the violent outcome of these protests yesterday, where at least 11 people were killed, nor did he anticipate the backlash by Chadian diaspora in Paris, which could also fuel more dissent, if not more violence. So that's where we saw that about face, and he's calling for, if anything, a return to civilian government as soon as possible. So that's really a blow to the military council right there.
But of course, it's clearly a difficult line to walk for President Macron, Chad at the moment, because France has been there supporting Chad's fight against militants in the Sahel region, but clearly can't be seen to be supporting any kind of bloody put down of this kind of pro-democracy protest.
Yeah, that's right, Charles. That's the tightrope that France is walking on right now. To put things in perspective, they've had a continued military presence since 1986. The main forward base for French deployment of troops is here in Ndjamena, with more than 5,000 troops to carry out counterterrorism activities, mostly in the Sahel countries of Mauritania, Mali, Niger, and countries like that, Burkina Faso, for example. So how does France realign its positioning there and maybe do a gradual withdrawal at the same time without compromising Chad? Chad's been its most reliable partner militarily in intervening and stabilizing a very unstable environment in the Sahel. That's the dilemma also for France, with some people saying France is more trapped in this relationship than Chad is.
And as a final sort of question, Karl, I mean, you've been there for a few days now. You wander around the streets talking to people. Do you get the sense that ordinary people are particularly concerned about the political situation, or is it more economic what they're worried about?
I think it's both, Charles. It's just stability. I mean, life is very, very hard. As I mentioned the other day, Chad is at the bottom of the human development tables of both the UN and the World Bank, with just alarming rates of maternal mortality. If you're a child under the age of 5, 20% will die. So it's really subsistence living. It's one of the poorest countries in the world, and yet it has oil wealth. And some people are saying that how could it have so much oil wealth, even though it's the 10th biggest oil producer in Africa, and apparently have wasted that wealth through mismanagement. But people are just most focused on just getting by day to day to day. That's the problem right there. So you have youth people who are saying enough is enough. And that's why you had what happened yesterday, and they may return to the streets tomorrow.
Karl, thank you ever so much. We appreciate your analysis. Our special correspondent, Karl Bostic, talking to me there from the Chadian capital, Ndjamena. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including anger, fear, and calls for a state of emergency over mounting security problems in Nigeria, with Islamist militants said to be just 2 hours away from the capital, Abuja. Stay with us.